Hello, welcome to another episode of Massalia Tales. The last episode was entirely dedicated to the huge battle between the forces of the Nuri and Eusebios. They came at us with a massive army full of sword and spearmen, ready to attack the daemons of Polymus, who were outright surrounded. In particular, the battle focused on the right flank, where our militia, just a few men deep, held off an enemy formation that was dozens of men deep and pressing heavily against them. They were in really a dire situation, but we managed to win out on the left flank and then surround the bulk of the enemy's forces here, eventually grinding them down, taking heavy casualties ourselves and almost losing Eusebios himself, but eventually managing to defeat them due to superior morale and positioning. So now the Nori have been defeated, it's time to see the spoils of victory. Word of the successful defence of Batavium reached a relieved council, who, as eager as they were to see Eusebius' power checked, had been truly fearful of the prospect of a barbarian invasion. The win meant that the new settlements of the as yet undeclared Massalian Republic were free to be toyed with and taxed without outside intervention. Council Task Force leader Crethius was in charge of spreading the council's wishes to this effect, but he was also gaining the attention of the Timu Choi. If they could win him over, he would be a key ally in their plan to establish power outside the council and outside Provincia. So it's time for us to have a look at the battle results of Eusebius' victory against the Nori forces. Only a close victory. We did take quite substantial casualties to defeat these two enemy stacks, but the enemy of course took a lot of casualties themselves. You can see the daemons of Polymus didn't lose any regiments in particular, we just lost a lot of men across all of them. The garrison army didn't fare so well, being completely destroyed, although they didn't have that many troops to begin with. So we're going to execute the survivors from the Nori. The enemy do have quite a lot of surviving troops still in the field, so it's possible we'll have to fight another major battle with them to finish them off if the daemons can manage it in their weakened state. Now the Rieti decided to come and attack Gelon. You might remember he was pushing to attack their capital, and now things are going to be easier because they've come out of their defences to face us in a field battle. Although the balance bar says the enemy have a huge advantage, I didn't think that was the case. The enemy mostly have their garrison units, which are medium spears and heavy swords. I do have a lack of proper heavy infantry, but I do also have the defender's advantage, lots of cavalry and siege weapons to help me defend this position. So you can see my formation I've set up, just a simple line of infantry, skirmishers in front, the siege weapons behind, and cavalry on the flanks ready to attack. I've also got a lot of javelins on my right flank, so we can definitely win the battle at the top of the hill and then charge down if needs be. So to begin with, my ballistas are going to hit the enemy with some stones. They don't do all that much because of the low accuracy, but when shots do hit, they can pile through the ranks, killing multiple enemies per shot. I also have some scorpions who'll be hitting them with some heavy bolts, which also have the ability to take down multiple enemies. But the majority of them are going to make it in. You'll notice the enemy are attacking us with a small army and ignoring their garrison for now. They wanted their proper military forces to engage us before their garrison army arrived. A bad idea, because now these forces are going to be completely focused upon by my entire army. So for example, this unit of swords is taking a lot of javelins and arrows as it comes in. They've lost a lot of strength. They're already down to half their men as they begin to engage with our lines, and they're not going to do very well fighting against our spearmen just because they're only a medium unit and our spears are pretty heavy. Here on the left flank, the enemy attacked with some heavy cavalry. These guys have the potential to rip through my medium cavalry, which we have seen happen before, but luckily I managed to catch them with a loosely spaced unit of these Gallic medium spears. They kill some of us, but we're able to now bulk them down, and now I can attack them with my medium cavalry a little bit more safely because the enemy aren't charging. The heavy cavalry have most of their strength in their charge bonus. Nearby, the best enemy units, these hoplites, are creeping up to battle, but so slowly they have almost no initiative. It looks like they're coming towards these swordsmen, who themselves look like they're planning on throwing javelins back, but they seem to be stuck and not actually doing it. It doesn't matter though, I can pretty much ignore those hoplites because they're going to be so slow, they're never going to catch me by surprise. Further up the hill, a unit of any hoplites has been defeated and is now retreating. The enemy's general seems to have come nearby to attempt to prevent this, but he is too late. It was mostly the action of nearby javelinmen who defeated those hoplites, and now the archers who are nearby can bombard the enemy's general since he's just parked up there. So this is a good opportunity to weaken his unit as the actual enemy army comes in. All of these garrison forces, rushing into battle, and as you can see on the tooltip, they're all very tired. They ran across the entire battlefield before they engaged us, meaning that once the actual melee fight starts, I'll have a critical advantage. This defender's advantage is going very well for me. You can see the enemy's charge is very stroppy, one of the least enthusiastic charges I've ever seen. They simply walk up to our lines and proceed to be cut down by our forces. These armed townsfolk clearly haven't got much experience in battle, or at least don't have much enthusiasm for it. The enemy do have some heavy swordsmen who will actually pose a threat against my spear lines, especially if they choose to exploit the gaps in the line, which I haven't noticed whilst actually playing, but luckily they don't. So the enemy are going to commit all of their forces into melee all across the line. You can see further down on the left flank I've got my swordsmen fighting with these enemy tribal spearmen. I have high hopes for this. The enemy already exhausted, and the swordsmen in principle should be able to beat them. On the extreme left is a surprisingly even engagement between their armed townsfolk and my Gallic levies. I thought that my guys, being actual soldiers, would easily be able to defeat the townsfolk, but actually both sides took about equal losses there, which I was surprised by. The good news though is that far up on the right flank, the enemy's advance has been pretty much crushed. Again, I'm using superior javelin troops back here to just bombard the enemy, stop them from getting a chance to fight us at all because their casualties are just so extreme. Those javelin men are my Gallic javelin men, which is the first time we've seen them being used. Gelon has a lot of Gallic troops in his army because he's been out of the Hellenic recruitment zones for a while, so he's had to build up some auxiliary style armies. Now, since the enemy's units are all engaged along my line, my cavalry can come back from harassing the enemy's missile units to attack them in the rear, inflicting morale shocks, which of course the enemy are not going to be impressed with. We have pretty much complete freedom now to start surrounding the enemy with my 3 squadrons of cavalry. The enemy still have a few missile units that's worth chasing off the field just so they don't attack us, but you can see the enemy's main body of troops are starting to fall back at this point, meaning my main line can now advance, so the enemy's missile troops are going to be pushed back right off the field along with all of these enemy main line units. So the enemy were pretty much routed by this point, but the battle went on because they had a couple of units that didn't rout along with the rest of them, including these guys, these hoplites, who were facing off against my spear infantry, but apparently they just came for the staring contest because they're not actually engaging me. They decided to stop 2 paces away, so my men, eagerly awaiting battle just in front of them, never got to engage with this unit. Luckily for me, I didn't actually have to bother killing them because as the rest of the enemy's army was defeated, they decided to give up. And then, at that moment, my men decided this was a key opportunity to kill them all, so they charged forward into the new formation and to start stabbing them. So I guess we won the staring contest, you could say. So the enemy's army is now completely routed. I had a bit of fun chasing them down and killing as many of them as I could because of course I want their forces to be as weak as possible because I'm about to go and attack this same army in the enemy capital. It's a heroic victory for Gelon's forces. That means we haven't really lost anything. The enemy have lost a lot. Their capital is as good as ours. What was going on in their minds? Not much, I imagine. Here I was expecting the enemy's last stand to be a grand battle, but no. They were only interested in getting themselves stuck on our spears as soon as possible, probably hoping to win favour with some ghastly hag who thinks she is friends with the gods. Makes it hard to win glory when the enemy could have been defeated by a mere child. A job for that know-it-all Cretheus, perhaps. Anyway, I guess we'd best press on and take our share of the loot and women before a new tribe swoops in. They really are like weeds, these barbarians. Cheap soldiers, though, I'll give them that. So the results are pretty good. The defeat of the Rieti here means that their town is now virtually undefended. You can see we've got at least 2/3 of their garrison army down, the remaining regiments not even at full strength, and most of the main actual military that attacked us first has been destroyed. Their general survived though, so we will have to fight him as well, but that's no big deal. Bad news is the Rieti are still up to no good with their agents. They poison Cretheus, and then even worse news, we have attrition across our whole empire, losing thousands of troops, especially important troops in the Daemons of Polymus and the Heralds of Massalia, our key armies. This is because of the food shortage from last turn, which has now been alleviated, but still leaves our armies in bad shape, especially the Daemons of Polymus, very damaged. We also see that Homer appears to be adopting some atheistic tendencies, which isn't too good to fitting in with Hellenic culture. He isn't quite sure the underworld even exists, so we have to be careful with him and keep him in range of a priest to make sure he doesn't go too far astray. So now it's time for Gelon to go and attack Coria. There's nothing really they can do to stop us. You can see the balance bar is extremely far in our favour. The small garrison army can't do anything. I could even starve them out. There's only a 1-turn wait, but I might as well go in I can take 13% losses for the capture of Coria any day. So the territory is ours. This is the second territory in this province. We have to take the Nori capital as well to unite the province of Rhaetia and Noricum, I think it's called, which is the province that spans all of the Alps. You can see that capturing this region means we're now back in a food deficit, exactly what I'm trying to avoid at the moment, so we're going to have to destroy some stuff. I noticed that both Octoduron and Coria both have a proving grounds, which reduces your food, so we definitely don't need two, and the fact it's reducing food means it's sealing the deal for its destruction. So we'll get rid of that and perhaps build a temple or food producing building in its place, but for now I'm going to have to exempt them from tax, which actually loses me a whole load of money. But it will only be for a short time, so soon enough I'll be able to get the food situation back in the green, and then we can keep taxing them and make a fair bit of money and start building up our empire, which is beginning to actually get to a point of being peaceable and able to undergo civic development. For Eusebios and the Daemons, I've decided to move them back into Batavia, mainly to increase their replenishment rate. We definitely need to get the force back up to strength, but also to give them a more defensive position against the Nori should their surviving forces wish to attack us again. I could actually upgrade his swordsman, and I almost did it then, but I realised I want to save the limited amount of money I have to build cavalry among Cretius' force, with the objective of then passing those cavalry over to Eusebius later. Now on the diplomatic table, I managed to get trade with Athens, so all that effort to get peace with them now actually has a dividend. We can actually make some money off our positive relations. I also noticed that the Sestani, who previously have definitely refused trade with me, have a high likelihood of going into a trade agreement. I'm going to see if I can get some money off them. They rejected the smallest amount of money I can demand, so I'm forced to go in without terms. This is very good. Improving relations with a key neighbour means our western border is increasing in safety. Next I came over to Carthage, and they also would accept trade agreement with a high chance. Knowing that Carthage were probably quite rich, I tried to get some money off them. The lowest amount I can demand is 2,000, but unfortunately they will not accept that. I wondered if there were some other terms I might be able to get into the agreement in order to make sure I'm getting something out of this, not wasting the high chance. The non-aggression pact still has it high, so they actually want to be my friends, which was not what I expected. So this looks good. Money on top of the non-aggression doesn't seem to be working. There's no real other diplomatic deals I can make, so I take that offer with them. We now have trade and non-aggression with one of the biggest nearby powers to us, which is excellent news. Our safety has just improved dramatically. In partnership with Carthage, we pretty much rule the western Mediterranean. It's just the barbarians to the north we need to worry about. The Sequani aren't interested in peace, which I guess I expected. The Pictones, though, are. I haven't seen them in a long time. I think they're being put under real pressure by the Celtiberian Confederation and are probably quite weak. I couldn't get any money off them to go into peace. You could even argue there's no point going into peace with them because being at war with them improves my relations with the Celtiberians, which is a more important relationship to uphold. But I decided to go into for peace, sorry, just to reduce the amount of people we're at war with. I'm trying to consolidate our western borders there, so it looks like we're a tiny bit safer as a result of that deal. Now the Nori forces do indeed attack Batavium as we move on. No particular reason for them to do this because, as you can see from the balance bar, they can't take it even though the Daemons are in terrible condition. Because Eusebius' unit was actually at really low strength, I didn't trust auto-resolve to keep him alive, so I cheekily quick-saved and came to check the options. We can either lose, closely win, or have a heroic victory. So after considering the options very closely, I decided I'd go for the heroic victory, thank you very much. So I take that. The enemy's army is pretty much wiped out. Our forces still look pretty much just as bad as they were before. At least we're regenerating them, and the enemy have now lost pretty much everything. They're really on the ropes. The Nori probably won't be a threat for a good number of turns from now on. However, the Sequani make a reappearance. This is exactly what I suspected they might do, and I gambled by moving Gelon away from Octoduron to attack Coria, and that gamble has failed for me. The Sequani can now attack the town, which doesn't have a full strength garrison, and according to the balance bar, is about to fall to the enemy. The enemy have berserkers, they have Gaelish, those guys who throw spears, and they have some good archers as well. But we do have defender's advantage, and our hoplite phalanx can usually hold against even berserkers, so let's have a go and see if we can hold off the enemy attack. The seat fillers in the assembly act jubilant on news of peace and further relations. It is quite revealing of how little they know of the state of affairs, for our diplomatic missions have achieved nothing above what would be expected given our recent gains and new access to northern slaves. Our neighbours will leave us be while there's profit in doing so, whatever military advantage they might have. That no one realised this was the case during recent wars is strange, for it is the principle that kept the peace for centuries past. Still, the war has ended in what looks like our favour. I'm sure you'll soon lecture me as to why in fact we are doomed. So here the Sequani come, bringing the majority of their forces from a southerly direction and leading with their berserkers, who go invisible as they approach, but they'll be back soon, and they're supported by their spears, who will be coming up behind the berserkers to throw their javelins, which is going to be quite inconvenient. My lines have set up on the choke point leading up to the capture point, so the enemy will have to pass through my phalanx if it wants to capture this town. I've got a line of militia with my stronger units waiting in reserve, and then the missile units behind to fire over the top. The enemy are also approaching from the north, but I've only got 2 squads of mob and a hidden unit of garrison hoplites to defend against them, because here it's actually just a bunch of missile units and 1 melee unit, some medium spears, so you won't be able to get past my hoplites. Now, since the enemy actually have a lot of their missile units here, I also decided to deploy my 1 unit of cavalry nearby, hidden by this building, so that when the enemy missile troops get close, I can charge out and attack them. The enemy were actually closer than I thought because they had hidden missile troops, so I had to charge out pretty much straight away. There's a unit of archers who are going to take the brunt of this heavy cavalry charge. The problem with charging out so soon is that it's distracting all the other enemy units who have not engaged with my infantry yet, which means they're all going to turn to engage with these cavalry. And of course this is a problem because the cavalry are going to be bombarded with other missiles and chased by spearmen. So this means they can only spend a very limited amount of time fighting with the archers, although we have enough time to defeat a significant number of them before these spears arrive to push my men away. I frantically order my men to escape the situation. A few of them decide to stay behind because they don't know what they're doing, but the majority of them will now be kiting off these units and stopping them from reaching the main fight. Meanwhile, other missile units have rushed into the centre of the town, and now I'm going to reveal my hidden melee troops who will charge out. They throw a massive hail of javelins into my unit, but it actually does pretty much nothing, and my unit now chases them back out of the town. The problem is, as I'm chasing them, another unit of enemy archers is going to hit me with volleys, and my garrison hoplites are particularly weak against archers, so you can see the volley kills a good number of them, and there's more where that came from. So I have to deploy my mob. The mob need to chase those archers away so that the hoplites can continue chasing their light infantry and defeat them. Meanwhile, back on the southern approach, the enemy's attack is about to begin. Their berserkers coming in a wedge formation, peppering us with javelins. Many of them just impact the shield line, and now they're going to come in for close melee combat, a situation in which they have a clear advantage being berserkers. Our men are also afraid of them, giving us a permanent decrease to our morale as long as this unit is around, not particularly useful. So the berserkers engage, and then they bring up the heavy spears, who of course are javelin throwing by default, which means when they order them to attack, they don't actually attack, they charge towards us, they immediately stop once they get into javelin range, and now they will just stand there throwing javelins at us until they run out of ammunition. Not a very useful situation, and they have a lot of those men. So my hoplite phalanx is going to be weakened by this missile fire before the main fight starts. I was going to charge down to try and force them into battle, but the enemy quickly moved through their general with some very heavy spears, so they'll be locking my guys in position there, so I'll have to just fight with them and take the javelins essentially. Unless I can somehow lure these spearmen up, there's nothing I can do to stop them just standing here and throwing at me. The only advantage I have is that their unit has deployed so deep that the men at the back aren't in range of my front line, so they're actually throwing javelins slower than they would have been otherwise. The flank of my formation has been decimated by enemy fire already. I've lost a unit of garrison hoplites. It's not actually javelins, it's another unit of archers which came out of hiding over here, outflanking our line and firing into the sides of the hoplite phalanx. Inconvenient, and I can't really take it out because the cavalry unit, which it is natural to do that with, is stuck over here in this little micromanagement heavy engagement. You can see I've managed to defeat one of the enemy units of light infantry. One of their squads of archers, one that came back from routing after the initial cavalry attack, is being chased off the field by my mob. Since the enemy are in skirmish mode, I can just chase them away and effectively defeat that unit using the mob even if it never engages. Meanwhile, the cavalry are still trying to run away from the mercenary band whilst attempting to get a charge on the slingers, also deadly because if the slingers do get a volley on me at close range, it might actually kill all of my cavalry. I'm moving the hoplites to engage with the enemy's spears. The enemy's light infantry came back from routing, so I decided to gamble and see if my mob could beat them. Of course, the mob are even weaker than these enemy javelinmen in melee, but the enemy's morale is very low and the charge from the mob breaks them, forcing them off the field. So now it's becoming a matter of just attempting to hold this approach into the town. I've pushed in some of my reserves, I've got the garrison hoplites fighting now, and the enemy are pushing in their spears, because they finally ran out of ammunition in some cases. They're actually going to start moving into the fight, and since they're going to be behind all of the berserkers, they won't do too much. It's the berserkers fighting on the front line, which is quite problematic of course because they're very strong. I've got my archers behind who will gradually reduce the enemy's numbers, so the longer the fight goes on, the better it will be for me. On the other side of the battlefield, I managed to catch up the enemy's mercenary band with my garrison hoplites. My guys are stronger, but are very, very outnumbered by the enemy's regiment, because my regiment was only at a tiny bit of strength. I think they only had about 50 men. So I'm going to try and use mob over there to attack the enemy in the rear, while the cavalry are going to abandon that side of the battlefield to come and defeat that unit of enemy archers that was firing into my flank. It was important to get rid of them because they were doing some nice damage to me. My cavalry eventually make it all the way around the field, engage them in melee. The enemy decide to stand and fight in melee, but it's not going to go too well, although actually the cavalry are surprisingly ineffective, probably because they're very tired now, having rushed across the battlefield and already been rushing about loads, trying to avoid enemy spearmen back over in the north. So now my missile units are all out of ammunition from behind the line, so I'm moving them all out of the town and to go round the back of the enemy's main blob here. Of course, they don't really stand a chance in melee because the enemy's units are all heavy infantry, but having them behind the enemy might be able to give me an opportunity to morale shock them. Unfortunately, at the moment, their morale is very high because they're actually kind of winning, fighting their way uphill and seeing many of my bodies on the floor, but of course actually a lot of the bodies were caused by the early javelin fire, and at this stage I'm actually not losing that many troops. The situation is quite stable. I tried charging with my archers to break the enemy, but as you can see, it doesn't do enough damage. The enemy's morale holds, so now my archers are just being slaughtered in melee with the enemy's heavy infantry, so I had to pull them back out to have a chance of doing it again in the future. But at least we have the battle completely under control now. The enemy are totally surrounded. It's becoming a slugging match. Can our infantry fighting down the hill beat their guys, especially the berserkers, who are still holding on this late into the battle? Both sides are pretty tired, but my guys will generally have more energy because a hoplite phalanx conserves stamina as it fights for long periods of time. So it's up to my militia to see what they can do against the enemy's heavy infantry. They're holding out pretty well, both sides taking casualties. We just need the enemy to take just enough casualties that it's possible to morale shock them into leaving. Tiny bit later you can see I actually pushed the enemy down the hill a little bit and then pushed in those men who came back from the northern side having defeated the mercenaries, and as they arrived the battle suddenly seemed to turn. There was a chain rout as my archers attacked the back of one of their units, so I threw in the rest of the archers as well to make sure the chain rout goes on. The enemy army starts to shatter and now the battle is effectively over all of a sudden, and since we have the enemy surrounded, their escape will be difficult. They're just going to pile into our men and we are going to close our little noose around the enemy forces. You can see they're moving out very slowly. We'll have plenty of opportunities to defeat enemies in this situation. So after a while of killing these barbarians, I let the battle come to an end. A close victory for the defenders of Octoduron. But that's all we need, really. All we had to do was defend the town, which by rights we should have lost. The enemy force should have been able to take this town, so it's quite useful that we've held it, even though a lot of the garrison was killed. The question is, do the Sequani have more forces, or was that everything? We'll see next time. Having now gone through a year of peace under Massalian rule, the greater part of Cisalpina calmed into an acceptance of their new masters. Greek supporters found power quickly, and the social order began to morph into one similar to Massalia itself, where the Greeks were greater partners in a unified culture. An end to the tribal conflict in the area left open chances for economic growth, a point that Crethius and Eusebios were independently hammering to the council. But the council was more interested in the internal affairs of Massalian legal bodies, leaving a reckless amount of power over their new lands to the isolated generals.